Part 2 of Chapter 10 of the Sundar. I apologise, it was my fault. I reached over to grab my iPhone to get it out of the sun and accidentally must have brushed against the keyboard and that blipped us off. So we're back to continue on with the story, and I'll try to knuckle down this time. I'll start from the beginning of that chapter since we got cut off, and just for the sake of cohesion and congruency. From Nogrod and Balagost the Nalgrim came forth into Beleriand, and the elves were filled with amazement, for they had believed themselves to be the only living things in Middle-earth that spoke with words or wrought with hands, and that all others were but birds and beasts. Excuse me. That they could understand no word of the tongue of the Nalgreen, which to their ears was cumbrous and unlovely, and few ever of the Eldar have achieved the mastery of it. But the dwarves were swift to learn, and indeed were more willing to learn the elven tongue than to teach their own to those of alien race. Few of the Eldar went ever to Nogrod and Balagost, save Eol of Nun Elmoth and Maeglin his son. But the dwarves trafficked into Beleriand, and they made a great road that passed under the shoulders of Mount Dolmed, and followed the course of the river Askar, crossing Gilion at San Athrad, the ford of stones, where battle after befell. Ever cool was the friendship between the Nalgrim and the Eldar, though much profit they had one of the other. But at that time those griefs that lay between them had not yet come to pass, and King Thingol welcomed them. But the Nalgreen gave their friendship more readily to the Noldor in after days than to any others of elves and men, because of their love and reverence for Auli, and the gems of the Noldor they praised above all other wealth. In the darkness of Ardar already the dwarves wrought great works, for even from the first days of their fathers they had marvellous skill with metals and with stone. But in that ancient time, iron and copper they loved to work, rather than silver or gold. Now Meliam had much foresight after the manner of the Maiar. And when the second age, every time I read that I have a little twitch, because my mother's father's name, non-biological father, who raised her from birth, was his name was Erich Meyer. Meyer sounds a lot like Maya, so that's why you see me do a little each time. It's quite comical actually. But what's in a name, people of Earth? What is in a name? Carries its own magic and its own identity. And when the second age of the captivity of Melkor had passed, she counselled Thingol that the peace of Ardar would not last forever. He took thought, therefore, how he should make for himself a kingly dwelling, and a place that should be strong, if evil were to awake again in Middle-earth. And he sought aid and counsel of the dwarves of Balagost. They gave it willingly, for they were unwearied in those days, and eager for new works. And though the dwarfs ever demanded a price for all that they did, whether with delight or with toil, at this time they held themselves paid. For Melian taught them much that they were eager to learn, and Thingol rewarded them with many fair pearls. These Círdan gave to him, for they were got in a great number in the shallow waters about the Isle of Balar, but the Nalgreen had not before seen their like, and they held them dear. Who doesn't love lovely pearls? One there was as great as a dove's egg, and its sheen was as starlight on the foam of the sea. Nymphelos it was called, and the chieftain of the dwarves of Balagost prized it above a mountain of wealth. Therefore the Nalgreen laboured long and gladly for Thingol, and devised for him mansions after the fashion of their people, delved deep in the earth. Where the Escaldune flowed down and parted Nedoreth from Region, there rose in the midst of the forest a rocky hill, and the river ran at its feet. Hello, Mr. Crow. Hello. There they made the gates of the hall of Thingol. Have you found my sterling silver antique asparagus spoon ring? Because if you have, can I have it back, please? Yes, I know you take shiny, shiny things. If I've lost it in the garden, it was probably you that took it. Blaming the crows for my own stupidity. Well, it doesn't hurt to ask. You never know, you might bring it back. That would be a magic of awe-inspiring potentialities. But all jokes aside, very often when I lose things around the house and garden, they come back to me eventually. So it's a reality that's been proven now many times. So I just hope that it's not gone forever. But look, at the worst, if the worst comes to the worst, and I don't find it in 6 months, within 6 months, I'll just save up some money and I'll buy another spoon like that. Well, that was very special because it was very ornate. Anyway, I'll just buy another one and make another one. It's not the end of the bloody world, is it? It's only money and time and effort and, I'll stupidly probably lose that one too. I'm starting to feel quite distraught about all my loss. So much loss. But we're on the eve of a new year, so this year is going to be different. I say that every year. This year's going to be better. Better times are coming. Everything's going to be lovely. And overall, there was a lot of grief and horror this year. Loss of Charlie, loss of a significant friendship, loss of a ring. But there were lovely things too, dancing wildly for Ramjet, who still tolerate me with my weird ways, and a few other bands, and just being contented with what is, and trying to let go of what's gone, and knowing that I can replace some things because I can remake them myself, but some things can never be replaced, like my Charlie and my Beauregard, all the cats, and lost Lost, fake, atrophied lovers. Can't replace that. But hopefully the next time I fall in love, it'll be with a man who truly, deeply loves me and has nothing but good intentions towards me. Is sincere and authentic. And is a truly good man. Now there's a nice little fairy story we have at Titania's Realm. Let's bend over and tickle our toes. You have to laugh. There they made the gates of the hall of Thingol, and they built a bridge of stone over the water, over the river, by which alone the gates could be entered. Beyond the gates wide passages ran down to high halls and chambers far below that were hewn in the living stone, so many and so great that dwelling was named Menegroth, the 1,000 Caves. But the elves also had part in that labour, and elves and dwarves together, each with their own skill, there wrought out the visions of Melian, images of the wonder and beauty of Valinor beyond the sea. The pillars of Menegroth were hewn in the likeness of the beeches of Oromi, stock, bough, and leaf, and they were lit with lanterns of gold. The nightingales sang there as in the gardens of Lorien, and there were fountains of silver and basins of marble and floors of many-coloured stones. Carven figures of beasts and birds there ran upon the walls, or climbed upon the pillars, or peered among the branches entwined with many flowers. And as the years passed, Melian and her maidens filled the halls with woven hangings wherein could be read the deeds of the Valar and many things that had befallen in Ardar since its beginning, and shadows of things that were yet to be. That was the fairest dwelling of any king that has ever been east of the sea. And when the building of Menegroth was achieved, and there was peace in the realm of Thingol and Melian, the Naugrim yet came ever and anon over the mountains, and went in traffic about the lands, but they went seldom to the Falas, for they hated the sound of the sea and feared to look upon it. To Beleriand there came no other rumour or tidings of the world without. But as the third age of the captivity of Melkor drew on, the dwarves became troubled, and they spoke to King Thingol, saying that the Valar had not rooted out utterly the evils of the north, and now the remnant, having long multiplied in the dark, were coming forth once more and roaming far and wide. There are fell beasts, they said, in the land east of the mountains, and your ancient kindred that dwell there are flying from the plains to the hills. And ere long the evil creatures came even to Beleriand, over passes in the mountains, or from the south through the dark forests. Wolves there were, or creatures that walked in wolf shapes. I like that he made that distinction. He's talking about shapeshifters there. Or other fell beings of shadow. And among them were the orcs, who afterwards wrought ruin in Beleriand. But they were yet few and wary, and did but smell out the ways of the land, awaiting the return of their lord. Whence they came, or what they were, the elves knew not then, thinking them perhaps to be Avari, who had become evil and savage in the wild, and which they guessed all too near, it is said. Therefore Thingol took thought for arms, which before his people had not needed, and these at first the Naugrim smithied for him, for they were greatly skilled in such work, though none among them surpassed the craftsmen of Nogrod, of whom Telhar the smith was greatest in renown. A warlike race of old were all the Naugrim, and they would fight fiercely against whomsoever aggrieved them, servants of Melkor, or Eldar, or Avari, or wild beasts, or, not seldom, their own king, dwarves of other mansions and lordships. Their smithcraft, indeed, the Sindar soon learned of them, yet in the tempering of steel alone of all crafts, the dwarves were never outmatched even by the Noldor, and in the making of mail of linked rings, which was first contrived by the smiths of Belagost, their work had no rival. At this time, therefore, the Sindar were well armed, and they drove off all creatures of evil, and had peace again. But Thingol's armories were stored with axes, and with spears and swords, and tall helms, and long coats of bright mail, for the hauberks of the dwarves were so fashioned that they rusted not, but shone ever as if they were new burnished. And that proved well for Thingol in the time that was to come. Now, as has been told, one Lenwi of the host of Olwe forsook the march of the Eldar at that time when the Teleri were halted by the shores of the great river upon the borders of the westlands of Middle-earth. Little is known of the wanderings of the Nandor, whom he led away down Undun. Some, it is said, dwelt age-long in the woods of the vale of the great river. Some came at last to its mouths, and there dwelt by the sea. And yet others, passing by Ered Nimraeus, the White Mountains, came north again and entered the wilderness of Eriador between Eredlun and the far mountains of Mist. Now these were a woodland people, and had no weapons of steel, and the coming of the fell beasts of the north filled them with great fear, as the Naugrim declared to King Thingol and Menegroth. Therefore Denethor, the son of Lenwi, hearing rumour of the might of Thingol and his majesty, and of the peace of his realm, gathered such host of his scattered people as he could, and led them over the mountains into Beleriand. There they were welcomed by Thingol as kin long lost that return, and they dwelt in Osoriand, the land of 7 rivers. Of the long years of peace that followed after the coming of Denethor, there is little tale. In those days, it is said, Dairond the minstrel, chief lore master of the kingdom of Thingol, devised his runes, and the Naugrim that came to Thingol learned them, and were well pleased with the device, esteeming Dairond's skill higher than did the Sindar, his own people. Sometimes it's like that, isn't it? You're not appreciated by your own. Sometimes your own try to destroy you, accuse you of being a Nazi and all sorts of ugliness over the years. But here we are. Erev Rosh Hashanah is coming at sunset. I have no kosher wine and no round challah, and although I could have whipped one up, I suppose, today if I wanted to, and no community and no congregation and no tribe and no fancy dinner to feast on tonight, no one to pray with, daven with, reading fairy stories at sacred space. In the broad scheme of the multiverses, does it really matter? No. So I'll handle it, babies. I'll handle it. As I've handled everything else that was vomited at me or hurled at me, thrown at me. Anyway, I guess in a twisted way, the COVIDian epoch has wreaked vengeance on many of my enemies. And I even grieve for that, because that is not a vengeance I would wish upon my fellow Homo sapiens sapiens, evil though many of them were and still are. To interfere with our very DNA and our ability to reproduce, that was a bridge too far. Now they want us to fly off to Mars and start a new civilization, obfuscating their roles as humans, like cowardly dogs is what they are. Yes, I'm talking to you, Elon Musk, and your handmaidens and co-conspirators and fillators. I'm talking to all of you. This is our planet that we're meant to cohabit in and thrive in and live as humans. Oh, I'm old now at 60. How many years have I got left? 10, 20. If I stay healthy enough, 30, although that's ridiculous. Might be taken out by the Botox treatment soon, so here is that. Semantics. Is it good or is it bad? And round we spin. And the DJ's tape deck going nowhere fast. By the Nalgreen the Keith were taken east over the mountains, and passed into the knowledge of many peoples, but they were little used by the Sundar for the keeping of records, until the days of war, and much that was held in memory perished in the ruins of Doriath. But of bliss and glad life there is little to be said before it ends, as works fair and wonderful, while still they endure for eyes to see, are their own record, and only when they are in peril or broken for ever do they pass into song. He's right about that, you know. In Beleriand in those days the elves walked and the rivers flowed, and the stars shone and the night flowers gave forth their scents, and the beauty of Melian was as the noon, and the beauty of Luthien was as the dawn in spring. In Beleriand King Thingol upon his throne was as the lords of the Maiar, whose power is at rest, whose joy is as an air that they breathe in all their days, whose thought flows in a tide untroubled from the heights of the deeps. In Beleriand still at times rode Oromi the Great, passing like a wind over the mountains, and the sound of his horn came down the leagues of the starlight, and the elves feared him for the splendour of his countenance, and the great noise of the onrush of Nahar. But when the Valaroma echoed in the hills, they knew well that all evil things were fled far away. But it came to pass at last that the end of bliss was at hand, and the noontide of Valinor was drawing to its twilight. For, as has been told and as is known to all, being written in lore and sung in many songs, Melkor slew the trees of the Valar with the aid of Ungoliant, and escaped, and came back to Middle-earth. Far to the north befell the strife of Morgoth and Ungoliant, but the great cry of Morgoth echoed through Beleriand, and all its people shrank for fear, for though they knew not what it foreboded, they heard then the herald of death. Soon afterwards, Ungoliant fled from the north, and came into the realm of King Thingol, and a terror of darkness was about her, but by the power of Melian she was stayed, and entered not into Neldoreth, but abode long time under the shadow of the precipices in which Dorthonion fell southward. And they became known as Ered Gorgoroth, the mountains of terror, and none dared go thither or pass nigh them. There life and light were strangled, and there all waters were poisoned. But Morgoth, as has before been told, returned to Angband, and built it anew, and above its doors he reared the reeking towers of Thongorodrim, and the gates of Morgoth were but 150 leagues distant from the bridge of Menegroth, far and yet all too near. Now the orcs that multiplied in the darkness of the earth grew strong and fell, and their dark lord filled them with a lust of ruin and death, and they issued from Angband's gates under the clouds that Morgoth sent forth, and passed silently into the high lands of the north. Thence, on a sudden, a great army came into Beleriand and assailed King Thingol. Now, in his wide realm, many elves wandered free in the wild, or dwelt at peace in small kindreds, far sundered. And only about Menegroth, in the midst of the land, and along the Falas, in the country of the mariners, were their numerous peoples. But the orcs came down upon either side of Menegroth, and from camps in the east between Kelon and Gilion, and west in the plains between Sirion and Narog, they plundered far and wide, and Thingol was cut off from Círdan at Eglarest. Therefore he called upon Denethor, and the elves came in force from Region upon Aros and from Osiriand, and fought the first battle in the wars of Beleriand. And the eastern host of the orcs was taken between the armies of the Eldar, north of the Andram, and midway between Aros and Gilion, and there they were utterly defeated, and those that fled north from the great slaughter were waylaid by the axes of the Naugrim that issued from Mount Dolmed. Few indeed returned to Angband. But the victory of the elves was dear bought. For those of Osiriand were light armed and no match for the orcs, who were shod with iron and iron shielded, and bore great spears with broad blades. And Denethor was cut off and surrounded upon the hill of Amon Ereb. There he fell, and all his nearest kin about him, before the host of Thingol could come to his aid. Bitterly, though his fall was avenged, when Thingol came upon the rear of the orcs, and slew them in heaps, his people lamented him ever after, and took no king again. After the battle some returned to Osiriand, and their tidings filled the remnant of their people with great fear, so that thereafter they came never forth in open war, but kept themselves by wariness and secrecy. And they were called the Lyquendi, the green elves, because of their raiment of the colour of leaves. But many went north and entered the guarded realm of Thingol, and were merged with his people. And when Thingol came again to Menegroth, he learned that the orc host in the west was victorious, and had driven Círdan to the rim of the sea. Therefore he withdrew all his people, that his summons could reach within the fastness of Neldoreth and Region. And Melian put forth her power, and fenced all that dominion round about, with an unseen wall of shadow and bewilderment, the girdle of Melian, that none therefore could pass against her will or the will of King Thingol, unless one should come with a power greater than that of Melian, the Maya. And this inner land, which was now long named Eglador, was after called Doriath, the guarded kingdom, land of the girdle. Within it there was yet a watchful peace, but without there was peril and great fear, and the servants of Morgoth roamed at will, save in the walled havens of the Falas. But new tidings were at hand, which none in Middle-earth had foreseen, neither Morgoth in his pits, nor Melian in Menegroth. For no news came out of Aman, whether by messenger, or by spirit, or by vision and dream, after the death of the trees. In this same time Fëanor came over the sea in the white ships of the Teleri, and landed in the firth of Dringist, and there burned the ships at Losgar. Just see how long chapter 11 is. Not long, so we'll continue with chapter 11. Let me just get a bit of a drink. I'm feeling very fading. I won't be long until that. I smashed open a coconut from my Kermie boy to enjoy this morning, and I kept the coconut water, which is delicious, so I'm actually looking forward to this. I've chilled it in the fridge. Oh, that really is delicious. Little pleasures along the way, people are there. Right, here we go. Chapter 11 of the Sun and Moon and the Hiding of Valinor. It is said that after the flight of Melkor, the Valar sat long unmoved upon their thrones in the Ring of Doom, but they were not idle, as Fëanor declared in the folly of his heart. For the Valar may work many things with thought, rather than with hands, and without voices and silence they may hold counsel one with another. Telepathy, people are there. Telepathy. Thus they held vigil in the night of Valinor, and their thought passed back beyond Ea and forth to the end. Yet neither power nor wisdom assuaged their grief, and the knowing of evil in the hour of its being. And they mourned not more for the death of the trees than for the marring of Fëanor, of the works of Melkor, one of the most evil. For Fëanor was made the mightiest in all parts of body and mind, in valour, in endurance, in beauty, in understanding, in skill, in strength, and in subtlety alike, of all the children of Ilúvatar, and a bright flame was in him. The works of wonder for the glory of Ardar that he might otherwise have wrought, only Manwë might in some measure conceive. And it was told by the Vanyar, who held vigil with the Valar, that when the messengers declared to Manwë the answers of Fëanor to his heralds, Manwë wept and bowed his head. But at that last word of Fëanor, that at the least the Noldor should do deeds to live in song for ever, he raised his head as one that hears a voice far off, and he said, "So shall it be. Dear bought those songs shall be accounted, and yet shall be well bought, for the price could be no other." Thus, even as Eru spoke to us, shall beauty not before conceived be brought into Ea, and evil yet be good to have been. What you doing, little handsome boys? Happy boy. Happy Cammy. Yes. But Mandor said, "And yet remain evil. To me shall Fëanor come soon." But when at last the Valar learned that the Noldor had indeed passed out of Aman and were come back into Middle-earth, they arose and began to set forth in deeds those counsels which they had taken in thought for the redress of the evils of Melkor. Then Manwë bade Yavanna and Nienna to put forth all their powers of growth and healing, and they put forth all their powers upon the trees. But the tears of Nienna availed not to heal their mortal wounds, and for a long while Yavanna sang alone in the shadows. Yet even as hope failed and her song faltered, Telperion bore at last upon a leafless bough one great flower of silver, and Lorelin a single fruit of gold. These Yavanna took, and then the trees died, and their lifeless stems stand yet in Valinor, a memorial of vanished joy. But the flour and the fruit Yavanna gave to Auli and Manwi hallowed them, and Auli and his people made vessels to hold them and preserve their radiance, as is said in the Nasilion, the song of the sun and moon. These vessels the Valar gave to Vardar, that they might become lamps of heaven, outshining the ancient stars, being nearer to Ardar, and she gave them power to traverse. Got your coconut, my boy. And she gave them power to traverse the lower regions of Ilmen, and set them to voyage upon appointed courses above the girdle of the earth, from the west unto the east, and to return. These things the Valar did, recalling in their twilight the darkness of the lands of Ardar, and they resolved now to illumine Middle-earth, and with light to hinder the deeds of Melkor, for they remembered the Avari that remained by the waters of their awakening, and they did not utterly forsake the Noldor in exile, and Manwë knew also that the hour of the coming of men was drawn nigh. And it is said indeed that, even as the Valar made war upon Melkor for the sake of the Quendi, so now for that time they forbore for the sake of the Hildor, the aftercomers, the younger children of Ilúvatar. For so grievous had been the hurts of Middle-earth and the war upon Utumno, that the Valar feared lest even worse should now befall, whereas the Hildor should be mortal and weaker than the Quendi to withstand fear and tumult. Moreover, it was not revealed to Manwë where the beginning of men should be, north, south, or east. Therefore the Valar sent forth light, but made strong the land of their dwelling. Isir the Sheen, the Vanya of old named the moon, flower of Telperion and Valinor, and Anar the fire golden, fruit of Lorelin, they named the sun. But the Noldor named them also Rana, Rana, I think it's Raina. It's got an infection. And Anar the fire golden. No, I've skipped down. But the Noldor named them also Rhaenar the wayward, and Vaesar the heart of fire that awakens and consumes. For the sun was set as a sign for the awakening of men and the waning of the elves, but the moon cherishes their memory. The maiden whom the Valar chose from among the Maiar to guide the vessel of the sun was named Arien, and he that steered the island of the moon was Tilion. In the days of the trees, Arien had tended the golden flowers in the gardens of Vanar, and watered them with the bright dews of Lorelin. But Tilion was a hunter of the company of Oromi, and he had a silver bow. He was a lover of silver, and when he would rest, He forsook the woods of Oromi, and going into Lorien, he lay in dream by the pools of Esti as Telperion's flickering beams, and he begged to be given the task of tending forever the last flower of silver. You happy boy, my Kermie? What are you doing? You're a beautiful boy. You're my beautiful baby boy. Yes, you are. Yes, I know. Yes, you're such a pretty boy. And Bo is too. I haven't heard you singing for a while, Bo. It's been a few days since you last sang. Ariane the maiden was mightier than he, and she was chosen because she had not feared the heats of Lorelei and was unhurt by them, being from the beginning a spirit of fire, whom Melkor had not deceived, nor drawn to his service. Too bright were the eyes of Ariane for even the Eldar to look on, and leaving Valinor, she forsook the form and raiment which, like the Valar, she had worn there, and she was as a naked flame, terrible in the fullness of her splendour. Eziel was first wrought and made ready, and first rose into the realm of the stars, and was the elder of the new lights, as was Telperion of the trees. Then for a while the world had moonlight, and many things stirred and woke that had waited long in the sleep of Yavanna. Hello, Mr. Scrub Turkey. He's building a mound in my bathtub that I filled with compost. He's thrown all the leaves that he's scooped up from the garden, thrown a mound on top of the bathtub, which is most inconvenient because I wanted to use that compost. But you know, in the broad scheme of things, does it really matter? No. You have to laugh. I'm beaten down by scrub turkeys and fake lovers and all sorts of strange little quirky things, but all you can do is laugh, ultimately. Laugh in the face of evil and madness and scrub turkeys making mounds in very odd, peculiar places people are there. Anyway, hopefully he'll just scoop it and put it somewhere else. He's here to strut his stuff now. You're here to strut your stuff, aren't you, my boy? Yes, Mama T. The servants of Morgoth were filled with amazement, but the elves of the outer lands looked up in delight. And even as the moon rose above the darkness in the west, Fingolfin let blow his silver trumpets and began his march into Middle-earth, and the shadows of his host went long and black before them. You have to do some scooching of leaves. Very single-minded bird. I mean, all you can do is laugh because I can't prevent him from doing anything he wants to do. He's very, very determined. And he's kind of beautiful too. Tilion had traversed the heavens 7 times, and thus was in the furthest east when the vessel of Ariane was made ready. Then Anar arose in glory, and the first dawn of the sun was like a great fire upon the towers of the pillory. The clouds of Middle Earth were kindled, and there was heard the sound of many waterfalls. Then indeed Morgoth was dismayed, and he descended into the uttermost depths of Angband, and withdrew his servants, sending forth great reek and dark cloud to hide his land from the light of the day star. Now Vardar purposed that the two vessels should journey in Ilmen and ever be aloft, but not together. Each should pass from Valinor into the east and return, the one issuing from the west as the other turned from the east. Thus the first of the new days were reckoned after the manner of the trees, from the mingling of the lights, when Arien and Tilion passed in their courses above the middle of the earth. But Tilion was wayward and uncertain in speed, and held not to his appointed path, and he sought to come near to Arien, being drawn by his splendour, though the flame of Anar scorched him, and the island of the moon was darkened. Because of the waywardness of Tilion, therefore, and yet more because of the prayers of Lorien and Esti, who said that sleep and rest had been banished from the earth, and the stars were hidden, Vardar changed her counsel, and allowed a time wherein the world should still have shadow and half-light. Anar rested therefore a while in Valinor, lying upon the cool bosom of the outer sea, and evening, the time of the descent and resting of the sun, was the hour of greatest light and joy in Aman. But soon the sun, I'm smiling because in Judaism our days begin with sundown, with sunset in the evening. Similarities there. But soon the sun was drawn down by the servants of Ulmo, and went then in haste under the earth, and so came unseen to the east, and there mounted the heaven again, lest night be overlong, and evil walk under the moon. But by Anar the waters of the outer sea were made hot and glowed with coloured fire, and Valinor had light for a while after the passing of Arien. Yet as she journeyed under the earth and drew towards the east, the glow faded and Valinor was dim, and the Valar mourned then most for the death of Lorelei. At dawn the shadows of the mountains of defence lay heavy on the blessed realm. Avardar commanded the moon to journey in like manner, and passing under earth to arise in the east, but only after the sun had descended from heaven. But Tilion went with uncertain pace, as yet he goes, and was still drawn towards Arien, as he shall ever be, so that often both may be seen above the earth together, or at times it will chance that he comes so nigh that his shadow cuts off her brightness, and there is a darkness amid the day. Therefore, by the coming and going of Anar, the Vala reckoned the days thereafter until the change of the world. For Tilion tarried seldom in Valinor, but more often would pass swiftly over the western land, over Avathar or Araman or Valinor, and plunge in the chasm beyond the outer sea, pursuing his way alone amid the grots and caverns at the roots of Ardar. There he would often wander long, and late would return. Still, therefore, after the long night, the light of Valinor was greater and fairer than upon Middle Earth, for the sun rested there, and the lights of heaven drew nearer to earth in that region. Sounds a bit like the equator, doesn't it? But neither the sun nor the moon can recall the light that was of old, that came from the trees before they were touched by the poison of Ungoliant. That light lives now in the Silmarils alone. But Morgoth hated the new lights, and was for a while confounded by this unlooked-for stroke of the Valar. And then he assailed Tilion, sending spirits of shadow against him, and there was strife in Ilmen beneath the paths of the stars. But Tilion was victorious, and Arien Morgoth feared with a great fear, but dared not come nigh her, having indeed no longer the power. For as he grew in malice, and sent forth from himself the evil that he conceived in lies and creatures of wickedness, his might passed into them, and was dispersed, and he himself became ever more bound to the earth, unwilling to issue from his dark strongholds. With shadows he hid himself and his servants from Arien, the glance of whose eyes they could not long endure, and the lands near his dwelling were shrouded in fumes and great clouds. But, seeing the assault upon Tilion, the Valar were in doubt, fearing what the malice and cunning of Morgoth might yet contrive against them, being unwilling to make war upon him in Middle-earth. They remembered none the less the ruin of Almarin, and they resolved that the like should not befall Valinor. Therefore at that time they fortified their land anew, and they raised up the mountain walls of the Pelori to sheer and dreadful heights, east, north, and south. Their outer sides were dark and smooth, without foothold or ledge, and they fell in great precipices with faces hard as glass, and rose up to towers with crowns of white ice. peace. A sleepless watch was set upon them, and no pass led through them, save only at the Kalakiria. But that pass the Valar did not close, because of the Eldar that were faithful. And in the city of Tirion, upon the green hill, Finarfin yet ruled the remnant of the Noldor in the deep cleft of the mountains. For all those of elven race, even the Vanyar and Ingwi their lord, must breathe at times the outer air and the wind that comes over the sea from the lands of their birth. And the Valar would not sunder the Teleri wholly from their kin, but in the Kalakiria they set strong towers and many sentinels. And at its issue upon the plains of Valmar a host was encamped, so that neither bird, nor beast, nor elf, nor man, nor any creature beside that dwelt in Middle-earth could pass that leaguer. And in that time also, which songs call Nortali Valinoreva, the hiding of Valinor, the enchanted isles were set, and all the seas about them were filled with shadows and bewilderment, and these isles were strung as a net in the shadowy seas from the north to the south, before Tol Eressëa, the lonely isle, is reached by one sailing west. Hardly might any vessel pass between them, for in the dangerous sounds the waves sighed for ever upon dark rocks shrouded in mist. And in the twilight a great weariness came upon mariners, and a loathing of the sea. But all that ever set foot upon the islands were there entrapped, and slept until the change of the world. Thus it was that, as Mandos foretold to them in Ahriman, the blessed realm was shut against the Noldor, and of the many messengers that in after days sailed into the west, none ever came to Valinor, save one only, the mightiest mariner of song. Right, we're up to chapter 12, beautiful people of Earth. I was going to finish there, but chapter 12 is also extremely short, so we'll continue. Chapter 12 of Men. The Valar sat now behind their mountains at peace, and having given light to Middle-earth, they left it for long untended, and the lordship of Morgoth was uncontested, save by the valour of the Noldor. Most in mind Ulmo kept the exiles, who gathered news of the earth through all the waters. From this time forth were reckoned the years of the sun. Swifter and briefer are they than the long years of the trees in Valinor. In that time the air of Middle-earth became heavy with the breath of growth and mortality, and the changing and aging of all things was hastened exceedingly. Life teemed upon the soil and in the waters in the second spring of Adar, and the Eldar increased, and beneath the new sun Beleriand grew green and fair. At the first rising of the sun, the younger children of Iluvatar awoke in the land of Hildorian, in the eastward regions of Middle-earth, but the first sun arose in the west, and the opening eyes of men were turned towards it, and their feet, as they wandered over the earth, for the most part, strayed that way. The Atani they were named by the Eldar, the second people, but they called them also Hildor, the followers, and many other names. Apanona, the afterborn, Engwa, the sickly, and Firima, the mortals. And they named them the usurpers, the strangers, and the inscrutable, the self-cursed, the heavy-handed, the night-fearers, the children of the sun. Of men little is told in these tales, which concern the eldest days before the waxing of mortals and the waning of the elves, save of those fathers of men, the Atanateri, who in the first years of the sun and moon wandered into the north of the world. To Hildorian there came no Valar to guide men or to summon them to dwell in Valinor, and men have feared the Valar rather than loved them, and have not understood the purposes of the powers, being at variance with them and at strife with the world. Ulmo, nonetheless, took thought for them, aiding the counsel and will of Manwë, and his messages came often to them by stream and flood. But they have not skill in such matters, and still less had they in those days before they had mingled with the elves. Therefore they loved the waters, and their hearts were stirred, and they understood, but they understood not the messages. Yet it is told that ere long they met dark elves in many places, and were befriended by them, and men became the companions and disciples in their childhood of these ancient folk, wanderers of the elven race, who never set out upon the paths to Valinor, and knew of the Valar only as a rumour and a distant name. Morgoth had then not long come back into Middle-earth, and his power went not far abroad, and was moreover checked by the sudden coming of great light. There was little peril in the lands and hills, and there new things, devised long ages before in the thought of Yavanna, and sown as seed in the dark, came at last to their budding and their bloom. Bit like the Tanya blooming at this late phase of my life. It's odd, people are there. Very, very odd. West, north, and south, the children of men spread and wandered, and their joy was the joy of the morning before the dew is dry, when every leaf is green. But the dawn is brief, and the day full often belies its promise. And now the time drew on to the great wars of the powers of the north, when Noldar and Sundar and men strove against the hosts of Morgoth, Balgrier, and went down in ruin. To this end, the cunning lies of Morgoth that he sowed of old, and sowed ever anew among his foes, and the curse that came of the slaying at Alqualondi, and the oath of Fëanor, were ever at work. Only a part is here told of the deeds of those days, and most is said of the Noldor and the Silmarils, and the mortals that became entangled in their fate. In those days, elves and men were of like stature and strength of body, but the elves had greater wisdom and skill and beauty, and those who had dwelt in Valinor and looked upon the powers as much surpassed the dark elves in these things as they in turn surpassed the people of mortal race. Only in the realm of Doriath, whose queen Melian was of the kindred of Valar, did the Sundar come near to match the Calaquendi of the blessed realm. Immortal were the elves, and their wisdom waxed from age to age, and no pestilence or sickness brought death to them. Their bodies indeed were of the stuff of earth, and could be destroyed, and in those days they were more like to the bodies of men, since they had not so long been inhabited by the fire of their spirit, which consumes them from within in the courses of time. But men were more frail, more easily slain by weapon or mischance, and less easily healed, subject to sickness and many ills, and they grew old and died. What may befall their spirits after death, the elves know not. Some say that they too go to the halls of Mandos, but their place of waiting there is not that of the elves, and Mandos under Iluvatar alone, save Manwë, knows whither they go after the time of recollection in those silent halls beside the outer sea. None have ever come back from the mansions of the dead, save only Beren, son of Barahir, whose hand had touched a Silmaril, but he never spoke afterward to mortal men. The fate of men after death, maybe, is not in the hands of the Valar, nor was all foretold in the music of the Ainur. In after days, when, because of the triumph of Morgoth, elves and men became estranged, as he most wished. Those of the elven race that lived still in Middle-earth waned and faded, and men usurped the sunlight. And then the Quendi wandered in the lonely places of the great lands and the isles, and took to the moonlight and the starlight, and to the woods and caves, becoming as shadows and memories, save those who ever and anon set sail into the west and vanished from Middle-earth. But in the dawn of years, elves and men were allies and held themselves akin, and there were some among men that learned the wisdom of the Eldar, and became great and valiant among the captains of the Noldor. And in the glory and beauty of the elves, and in their fate, full share had the offspring of elf and mortal, Eärendil and Elwing, and Elrond, their child. So this concludes chapters 11 and 12, and I'll be back tomorrow with chapter 13, which is a bit longer, and probably will continue. I won't say how many chapters I will read tomorrow because I don't know yet, do I? But if I'm feeling sprightly, carry on. Carry on, people of earth. Have a beautiful afternoon wherever you are in the space-time continuum. Here it is now 2:06 p.m. So, blessed be from Titania's realm, sacred space. Bye for now.